Detective Wenjian Liu was a good man. He walked a path of courage, a path of sacrifice, and a path of kindness. This is who he was, and he was taken from us much too soon.
Of course, that was the mayor of New York talking at the funeral of the officer Wenjian Liu, and you saw the chapel where that took place, as well as outside the church where the police turned their back when he was actually speaking. And this, I talk about a relationship. There is no relationship right now between the New York police force as well as the mayor. So Austin Peterson joins us. He's editor of the Libertarian Republic. I think that's a fair comment to make, isn't it, Austin?
Yes, it is. Happy New Year, Pat. Thanks
Happy New Year. Good to see you.
Good to see you as well.
Yeah, there's a bad relationship, obviously, between the officers and the mayor. People who are conservatives, libertarians, right-leaners and stuff, obviously no fan of de Blasio. Those people do tend to be a little bit more supportive of the police. However, in this situation, this is the type of time when you have open disrespect for the person that they work for. And I think the NYPD seems to have forgotten that they are public servants, not political activists. That's not what we hire them for. If they'd like to be political activists, they should probably take off their badge. If I was the mayor of New York, I would fire every single officer involved. I would disband their union. I would reduce the size of their force, and I would privatize most of their duties for this blatant show of disrespect from the people who are tasked to be our public servants.
He would be playing right into their hand, though. Isn't that exactly what they want? Because they say the mayor has disrespected the police on several occasions.
Well, the police have disrespected the citizens by choking to death a homicide of a man whose crime was selling loose cigarettes, and people want to try and blame the police necessarily for that. I do think that the problem is from big government and over-criminalization. Since the events have happened, the two officers were killed, we have seen a decline in arrests. I think it's something like 66%, and the police are saying things like, "Oh, well, now we're scared for our safety, so we're only going to enforce those crimes which are absolutely necessary." Oh, I'm sorry, isn't that supposed to be what it is? If we're so hyper-criminalized, what are the police doing if, now they're no longer arresting people for things like public intoxication or drug crimes or things like that. So now that the police have sort of stepped away from their duties, they're giving ammunition to their critics for why are they there? What is the point? So whether or not they're playing into the mayor's hand, it doesn't change the reality that the over-criminalization of society is leading to more civilian deaths. Now, a lot of people are very upset that these two men died. A lot of people were very upset when we had to kill the British regulars to throw King George off our back. So I can't understand why people are always trying to say, well, these public servants who are making these political statements like this should be immune from some sort of repercussions. So I don't think that they should be, Pat.
Well, except that, Austin, this is an individual circumstance in an individual city where the police feel that the mayor didn't support them when there was a protest that was launched, impromptu, not organized, that was talking about death to the police. And the mayor didn't stand behind his police force. Let's just break it down to that incident. Do you think the police were warranted in not getting the mayor's support?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, they were upset because the mayor was telling his biracial son, be careful of the police. I'm not biracial, but my father, who is a very strict conservative, always said, be very careful in your interactions with the police because their job is to make an arrest. And, I just really don't understand the mindset behind the Tea Partiers and conservatives who are so anti-government, and yet when the police come out, it's, oh, well, we've got to just support them no matter what. Well, did you know that the city of New York and the taxpayers of New York have paid almost $500 million in NYPD-related settlements over the past 5 years? If you were paying that out of your own checkbook, don't you think you'd be a little bit angry too, Pat?
Absolutely. I don't really have a side on this. Let's take a quick break. I'll come back with you, Austin, though.
Thanks.
Let's pick up on a little conversation Austin Peterson and I were having. And Austin, you made an excellent point in the first part of this discussion, basically pointing to America as a violent society. And I've seen any number of articles talking about, slavery and genocide of the native peoples and those things as the generation, as the reason America exists in the first place. And then in addition to that, you've got the presence of guns and mental illness and poverty in the United States. Is the United States a violent society? I guess is a real question.
Well, good question. Our founding fathers, Benjamin Franklin, they said that America was a bit more of a violent nation, and that was one of the reasons that compelled us to separate from Great Britain, and that was in the debates in Philadelphia. But, you know, I'd like to read a quick sentence from one of our founding documents, the Declaration of Independence, where they complained about King George, how he has sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance. And they were complaining about the British tax collectors and the British officers, the swarms of redcoats that were sent out amongst the people. And, you know, I hate to compare our domestic police forces to redcoats, but when they are acting in such a manner that was indicative, it reminds me of how the redcoats acted, then I have to call it out for what it is, Pat. You know, I think the problem here is that the Americans, we've stopped relying on the idea of individualism and self-defense. A cop is a bailout, okay? You should call a cop if you need help, backup, a little bit of backup, curb stomping someone who's attacking you. But it used to be that Americans thought of a cop as someone that you called when you needed some extra help. But right now, we all think, well, we need to just call police officers whenever something goes down. Whatever happened to individualism? Whatever happened to private security? Whatever happened to the right of self-defense? Well, New Yorkers
that's easy to answer, us. In a litigious society, I mean, you go, if you hit a thief as he's stealing out of your pocket in the United States, you're going to get sued for hitting him.
Right. That is exactly right.
So the police become a neutral party, don't they? I don't know.
I don't look at any government institution as a neutral party. The job of the police is to protect the government. There was a Supreme Court here in the United States that ruled that the police officers have no duty to protect American citizens from attack. There was a case in New York City where a man was trying to stop a subway attacker. The police department stood in the subway, watched the entire altercation go down, waited until it was over, and then intervened, because they don't have any legal responsibility to do so. So if the citizens of the United States will not be protected by their own police forces, then I think it's time for the citizens of the United States to take charge of their own self-defense and stop relying on a bailout, stop relying on the police, because the police will get there after an incident happens, and they'll put a toe tag on your dead body. So I suggest more Americans take up the idea of individualism, self-defense, and it's time to disband these redcoats.
Isn't the corollary, though, then more people will go out and get guns, and then you'll have more one-on-one violence?
Good. Armed society is a polite society. You know, when somebody comes in and puts a gun in your face, the idea is, behind self-defense, is that you can then end that person's aggressive act. But people in New York are so terrified and cowed, they think only the government can save them. Only the government can keep us safe. Well, that's not true. And that is not a conservative idea to say, oh, well, the police are there to keep us safe. They're like, oh, you liberals, you libertarians, you're the first people to call a police officer when something bad happens. No, we're the first person to pick up a gun and defend ourselves. And to say that, and it is so insulting, Pat, to say that we should rely on the police for our safety. It is insulting to the idea of individualism and self-defense to say that only government can keep us safe. That's a lie, and it's un-American.
What about the concept of a different style police force? What we've seen over the last 2 decades, or certainly the last decade, is a militarization of police forces across the United States. Whereas in the UK, for instance, only recently were they given guns. They had billy sticks. They didn't really have any way of enforcing. They were there to mitigate between peoples. Do you think American police forces should look at the UK for some kind of guidance?
Oh, absolutely. You know, I'm not the type of person who always puts my nose in the air over everything just because it comes from overseas. I'm a little bit skeptical, but I do think that the militarization of police is a big problem here in the United States, Pat. You know, it's funny because they don't want Americans to own these types of guns, but yet they put them in the hands of our police forces. Well, what do you think our founding fathers would have said about that? Do you think that the Second Amendment was written for hunting? No, the Second Amendment was written so that we could shoot at government if it ever became tyrannical. That's exactly what it was written for. That's what the Patriots were doing in 1776. That was the whole point of the American experiment. And I think that people need to stop becoming so reliant on our police forces. The police are only there to make an arrest. The Supreme Court has ruled that the job of the police is to protect the government, not the people. If that were different, Pat, then maybe I would feel differently about the militarization of police. But as it is, they should be disarmed and they should be brought low. We need more Mayberry, less Fallujah on our streets.
I love Mayberry. Great show. Austin, we could discuss this one for a long period of time, but unfortunately we've run out of time. Appreciate your thoughts as always, and again, a Happy New Year.